Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. My name is Jasleen Kaur. Khalsa Sajna Divas Diyan Bahut Vadaiyan Sareਆਂ ਨੂੰ, and on behalf of Sikhri, we wish you and your families a very happy Vaisakhi. Today's webinar will be on Khalsa Inauguration, Indian Subcontinent, and Freedom Solidarity. I'm more than honored to introduce our following guest speakers. To start, we have Harinder Singh, who is a widely respected educator and thinker. He currently serves as the Senior Fellow Research and Policy at the Sikh Research Institute. Mr. Singh co-founded Sikhri and the Punjab Digital Library, and to say the least, his contributions to the Sikh community have had monumental impacts. Next, we have Ramandeep Kaur Grewal, who practices corporate law in Toronto office of Stikeman Elliott LLP. Ramandeep is passionate about Sikh youth and community leadership building and regularly participates as a speaker and facilitator in various youth-focused initiatives. I look forward to hearing Ramandeep ask Harinder some very insightful and enriching questions. And on that note, I will pass the floor to Ramandeep Kaur for the discussion portion of this webinar. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Jasleen, and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This seminar marks a full year since we started this official program, although it was before Vaisakhi of last year. Harinder and I had the privilege of doing a seminar on Vaisakhi in 2020. And I'm sure none of us could imagine we would still be mostly, I guess, working from home or in various lockdown conditions. And so we do wish you are all doing well, your families and friends are keeping healthy and safe, and we are happy to see that a light is around the corner in many countries. So wherever you're joining us from the globe, thank you so much for joining us again. Congratulations and heartiest best wishes on this Vaisakhi 2021. A lot has changed in 1 year. I think we've all gone through a significant personal journey in terms of whatever challenges we faced given the pandemic and the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. But the Sikh Panth as well has gone through a really interesting time for various reasons, geopolitical, social, and other reasons as well. And the world, indeed, we've seen a lot of we've seen a lot happen in the world through summer of 2021, 2020 and beyond. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to try and unpack some of that. So first of all, I'm going to turn to you, Harinder, and let's get right into it. We have a really hefty title for our seminar today, not the usual when you think about Vaisakhi, Khalsa Inauguration, Indian Subcontinent, and Freedom Solidarity. I'll be honest, when I read the title the first time, I had to scratch my head to try and figure out what was going on and what we were going to cover and why we seemingly took these disjointed concepts and put them all together. So why don't we start there? Let's start with the first section. So why are we calling it inauguration? You know, what exactly is Khalsa Inauguration in a few words?
Sure, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. And if we can get successful lawyers to scratch their head, I think we're starting on the right level. Look, Khalsa Inauguration, because in Punjabi, when we are utilizing certain words and now translated into English and other languages, we keep saying, was the Khalsa created? You know, was it Khalsa established? We are using the word inauguration because we feel it rightly presents the idea that the Khalsa was in the making according to the Sikh tradition, according to Gurbani, according to history and Rahat and all the other secondary sources. Everything started from Guru Nanak. So even when Bani lines or historical lines attributed to Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj and his Sikhs, when they say Pragatyo Khalsa, you know, Parmatam ki Mauj, the Pragatna is that it was not visible. Its formation as we see it today, its declaration, its establishment, whatever those words are. So we cannot say it was created. So inauguration is to imply that it was brought out in as an open declaration in front of people, in front of a crowd, what we might say today, where there was an open invitation. And in that open invitation, in front of the Sikhs and the world and the Punjab, Khalsa was presented as being in the form of the Guru. So that's why the word inauguration. the process started, the chiseling started with the Shabad from Guru Nanak. And we see this in the Shabads of Guru Nanak. When the Vaisakhi is brought out, when Guru Nanak Sahib says, Vaisakhi will be pleasant and beautiful for us when the Shabad enters our consciousness. And Guru Arjan Sahib says the same thing about Vaisakhi. He says Vaisakhi will become even much more powerful for us when Sant Peta Har Soe, when we are ready to offer the self to the truth exemplars. And then Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj comes and says, here is the consolidation of all those ideas. And in the archetype, what he called the Khalsa, the sovereign. And that's what was inaugurated on one Vaisakhi, the Vaisakh day of 1699.
So that's very interesting. You know, when we think about Vaisakhi, and often, particularly around this time in April each year, a lot of the focus is on the ceremony and the symbolism. We're all extremely familiar with all the symbolism and the ceremony associated and the typical imagery. And we do talk about the individual, right? This is what this means for people individually. But what about the collective Sikh Panth? So, uh, you know, I have two questions actually. I'm going to split them up to just piggyback off of something you said. Why then in 1699 did Guru Gobind Singh Ji choose this time to reveal or inaugurate the Khalsa that was, culminating in the works, as you have said, since Guru Nanak's time, and what did that mean for the collective Sikh month? What's the broader significance above the individual?
Absolutely. I think we don't have the direct answer from Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj in that sense that why this particular day or that particular year. Sometimes you get caught up into the years and the dates, and I don't want to do that either. Whether you think it was the 13th or the 14th or the 15th, and Sikhs are celebrated on both. Historically, if you allow for Gregorian calendar, it would have been March 30th, or if you allow for another one-day adjustment, it actually becomes March 29th. But what is clear is it was a Vaisakhi day because it's a lunar calendar thing. It's a Desi calendar thing as well. Now, Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, if you look at it, what happened between 1675 when Guru Tegh Bahadur Pasha was martyred, or we would say politically assassinated in today's vocabulary, for fighting for people's right, there was a preparation going on. The battles were being fought. The Hola Mahallas had started. The new kind of poetry and the new kind of darbars had started. And it was preparation is what we would say. From 1675 to 1699, you have a preparation going on. And when somebody as an apprentice is ready, then you bring it out in public. So one way to say that is what we now call, like I'm sure you're involved in, organizations are involved in, there's a succession planning. That now that we have used the Shabad and the ability of this wisdom, which was given to us through Guru Nanak, through Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, now it is being democratized. It is being disrupted. The world hasn't seen these things. And this idea, this constitution, and this responsibility in the corporate sense or in the panthic sense is being transferred to beyond individualism, to the collective. That's what happened at a panthic level. But these were not just the ceremonial Panj Piares as we use them now. Every ceremony is very powerful, but it can only be powerful if the idea is that they were enthroned. And that's what I want to say. Panj Piare means 5 lovers. 5 lovers became the decision makers. And that's what we need to focus on, that the ceremony is only powerful if it brings out certain ideas in practice in a form of collective leadership.
And so let's, on that concept, I like how you have described that they were enthroned. It's a very heavy word and implies, many things were going on. In addition to what where we typically leave it at in terms of taking Khandidi Ball and becoming a Khalsa, and everyone is equal, and you've initiated yourself on this path to be committed to the Guru. And so so what is the significance of that, of enthroning the Khalsa? And I'm going to tack onto that a slightly different question too, is that significance still relevant today? How, in that milieu, starting from Guru Arjan Sahib's Shahidi, we understand what was happening, and that Guru Gobind Singh Ji has now picked the right time and the right environment to enthrone the Khalsa in this very large crowd during Vaisakhi festival. But how is that still relevant? Is that message relevant, or should we look at it from a different lens, or are we looking at it from the same lens today in terms of enthroning of the Khalsa?
Oh, we must go back to that element. Otherwise, we will be only sending happy Vaisakhi messages, which almost all political parties have adopted throughout the world now. That is not going to cut it. I think that works from a Punjabi sense, or in a congratulatory or celebratory sense, that it's also a harvest festival for the Punjabs and Punjab's population. But it does not necessarily work from the Sikh sense. From a Sikh sense, it means enthroning is a very important process, which means they are the decision makers on behalf of the collective. So they are not an absolute power, but they are the ones who interpret and negotiate and consider what is good for the Panth, this collective, this large tent, which is now 30 billion. And they did it right on from that day onwards. Professor Puran Singh called it the greatest act of genius of Guru Gobind Singh was that he inaugurated or established the Khalsa. And the second greatest act of genius was that they were given the ability to make these decisions. So this idea is very much was alive. In the next 100 years, we see the victories for the Punjab and for elements of South Asia out of it. For next 200 years, we see it in various movements, at least glimpses of it, if not in a collective. But even today, when the Panth actually invokes the collective decision making, everyone shakes up, including the Sikh political parties, including the state structures wherever Sikhs are living. So this idea of enthroning the five, do not reduce this to be just Nagar Kirtans and Amrit initiation ceremonies. There is a serious deliberation of the Shabad, which is brought into as a power of the as a privilege and as the responsibility to deliberate and make a decision, which is going to be in line with the Sikh vision of what I call one force, oneness paradigm, this idea of Ek Oankar and Naam. Absolutely, it's relevant, but it has been undermined. It has not been practiced. So we have gone only to the celebratory modes, whereas we have to bring it into the governance modes.
Okay. I'm going to come back to this idea of empowering decision makers and the extent to which we think there's some undermining that's been going on, particularly in contemporary times. But just to take it back to some of the common terminology and symbolism around Vaisakhi, we often talk about this concept about Ape Gurjela, and people say as a part of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's genius was this, both symbolic but very significant act of then empowering the decision makers, the Panj Piare, and then submitting to them as a disciple. So can you unpack this for us? What was more than the symbolic? What was the significance, and what was behind that?
Oh, it's actually it was much more than symbolism. I think we have reduced them to symbolisms. It was a very practical measure. When you present an idea, Guru Nanak Sahib onwards idea was presented. In fact, Guru Amar Das Patshahi, if I'm not mistaken, has written this in Guru Granth Sahib, that Sikh Guru Sikh hai, ek hai, Guru Upadesh chalaye. That the Sikh and the Guru, the protege and the mentor become one when the protege is furthering the mission of what mentor has taught. So think about that for a second. That's what a Guru-Sikh relationship is. It's not of subservience. It's of becoming that you also have the same light, the same jyot, which means the same capacities, potentialities to go exercise those. And what Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj does is that day, that we have been talking about, we believe in the idea of one. But now, just practically think about this for a second. You have 5 individuals in an utter volunteerism. None of them belong to the upper caste or the Savarnas. None. 0. And this is 1699. You know how bad the caste system and its sort of formations are, not just in the Hindu society, but everyone who's touched by the Hindu society, including the Sikhs and the Muslims, everyone else who's touched by it, who live in subcontinent of India. You have 5 individuals who belong to the low caste, so-called, and they are enthroned. Can you imagine the kind of level of disruption? Of course, Vaisakhi we just think is only singing a kirtan. Ape Gurjela is this, that not only we talk about this idea, not only we believe in this idea, now they are given the Patshahi on behalf of the Khalsa. And all 5 of them were not selected by the Guru. Guru just said, look at these volunteers, these lovers. And this is the criteria. They were the lovers of the Guru, Pyare. Beloved is the Guru, the lovers are the Sikhs. And these 5, every single one, only one Punjabi, 4 non-Punjabis coming from all over subcontinent of India, and every single one belonged to what non-Swarna Jatis, the so-called the low caste. This created a havoc, including among the Sikhs who were present. This is the practical nature of we put our belief system in practice right there while the Guru is present, and Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj supervises this for another 9 years to make sure this system, this phenomena, this governance, this jot and jugat, this light and methodology continues. That's how practical it was. Was it comfortable for people? Absolutely not. Was it revolutionary? Radically revolutionary, because nowhere since then we have seen this. It was done by the Guru himself, and Guru presided over it, and then Guru declared a doctrine from there onwards. This is why, this is how we will live. So that's what happened that day. It was a complete disruption of who even becomes the representative of the Sikhs, who even becomes, who has the capacity or potentialities. And it was completely established with a mandate which came from volunteerism, that it could be anyone and everyone. And if it means all 5 are from the Avarnas Jatis or the Losoka Dalits, then let it be. And that's what happened that day.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting perspective, because it really does take it to the next level. Because we often talk about the fact that the Panj Piare came from different castes and different socioeconomic statuses, and this, the inauguration of the Khalsa and the creation, the revelation equalized and was, it democratized the Panth. But then the Guru submitting himself and effectively making this very significant declaration that anyone could be a leader on par, effectively, and capable of what the Guru was capable of is enormous. So let's talk about the Panj Piare. So they represented a lot of different perspectives, right? They brought with them their own, we've talked about the socioeconomic difference in the caste, but also geographically dispersed. Now, I'm going to ask you 2 questions there. So we know they came from all over the subcontinent or the region. And then you did say in your last response that the Guru did not select them, right? They were self-selected. They volunteered because they were lovers of the Guru. So, I often think, was this by design? Could Guru Gobind Singh Ji have expected it? Was he expecting that 5 people from different regions and different castes would put their hands up? Or is that just a happenstance of the circumstances and the people that came forward? But clearly there was a significance to that, and there's an impact of the geographic dispersion. So let's talk about that a little bit, as to what that meant for the subcontinent.
So let's start even today. We know these days we are celebrating Vaisakhi. We also know this happens to be a Ramzan. And we also know there is a Guddi Padwa going on, and we also know there's a Ugadi festival going on. So what does this really mean? Festivities continue from various cultures, from various regions, in various languages, in various modes of celebration. Some of them are only limited to worship. Some of them have fastings in them. Some of them have become Punjabi style. Some of them are what we could collectively call South Indian style. Well, that's what was going on at that time as well. We don't know whether it was a design or whether it was happenstance or whatever else we want to call it. What we do know is what actually happened. So we can only interpret the event and the doctrines of the time. And one of the things which happened that day was that it is a fact that only one of them was from Punjab. So think about that, what it means for subcontinent, that from the time of Guru Nanak Sahib, which he traveled from Sri Lanka to Saudi Arabia, that's the expanse of Guru Nanak and everything in the middle. From that time, the Sangats had developed. People used to go to those areas. People were aware of it. But what were they aware of? It wasn't the personality only of Guru Nanak. Every relationship which we see from the time of Guru Nanak onward is based on Shabad. Some of them had never seen Guru Nanak, but they knew this is what Guru Nanak's belief system is. So you see this when the volunteers are stepping up to the plate, as we say, there is a fear that day. There is excitement. There's a fear. And we should read the poetry of Harinder Singh Mehboob, who describes the morning of that Vaisakhi day. There is something happening in the nature. There's something happening in the creation. And when Pai Singh describes an eyewitness account of 100 years ago when he discovered something, what were people writing about? Which heads were cut off or not? So we are interested in some of those events as well, which are very dramatic. Yes, the idea of head is very, very powerful. It means what you believe, your thought, your intellect, as well as what are you willing to give up to protect that thought, which means your physical head. And you see that playing out in Sikh history. So that day, people who ate different things, spoke different things, had different, what I call the Nash doctrine, as I understand from history, that who had previous religious understandings, superstitions, lineages, embarrassments from an idea of sharam, like you're not allowed to do certain things. All of those things were destroyed. And when they came together as one. So this is the significance that the subcontinent of India, which had heard about Guru Nanak, we used to maybe personally read certain things or go check out a particular Guru when the Vaisakhi celebration started from the time of Guru Amar Das Sahib. Whoever chose to came on that day, and on that day, they are the ones who answered the call. So you see an intermixing of religion, culture, caste, language, regionalism, what they wore, what they ate, how they thought. All of that got disrupted, and we are presented in a collective leadership. I say collective as a representatives of the people, not an absolute leadership. As a collective, they came and they were inaugurated, and this is what was happening. Subcontinent had never seen this, and since then hasn't seen this. If there was an idea to protect what we now call from these 8 countries, which say India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and we sometimes forget Maldives. When we say subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, this is what the ecosystem of the time is at the time of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj.
That's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm imagining it in my mind. And we'll come back to this. So I'm not going to ask you this question, but I do want to just leave the comment here. And it invokes to me a lot of what we're seeing in and around the farmers' protest, in the sense of all sorts of different people coming together who otherwise maybe would not be sitting at the same table and seeing eye to eye, gender, caste, class, region, language, what they eat, how their culture manifests itself, but united in a cause and kind of melding into one collective voice. But we'll come back to that because I don't want to leave Vaisakhi ceremony just yet, although we will in just a minute. I'm going to pause also to remind you that we are going to start taking questions around the halfway mark. We've got 1 hour for this seminar, and we're just coming up along 30 minutes. So please do put your questions in the Q&A box. Let us know your name and where you're joining us from, because we love to know where you are sitting and connecting to us. But going back to another hotly debated topic, and let's take a minute to talk about this, especially around Vaisakhi. We often talk about the fact that there were no women who came forward in the Panj Piare. And here's an issue that people have all sorts of takes on it and very strong views. So any particular perspectives that you have on whether on how to think about this?
No, absolutely. I think I'm going to say, if you want to seriously look into this, the only author who I believe till date who has explored the Khalsa identity, in fact, the title of the book is Birth of the Khalsa by Dr. Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh, where she's presenting to us a Khalsa rememory from the feminist perspective. No author that I'm aware of has even looked into looking at Khalsa from a Gurbani's angle also. And she gets into this in much more detail. But I would say very simply is this. Are we going to then only invoke every time we do Amrit ceremony since then, or initiation ceremony? Do we only include the 5 low castes? I mean, those kind of debates are not useful, in my opinion. They are particularly in the case of race, what we now call caste within Indian confines, but it's actually a global thing. And we see those race relations, how they play out even today in Punjab and among Sikhs, and also among women. The second issue is gender. They were included. All of them were included. Every single individual was included. There are historical reasons for certain things, but we need to look at Khalsa as a collective identity, because that's what it was. When we are looking at individuals, that is to provide the level of disruption which was going on. And one of the levels of disruptions we see was from a caste dynamics. The second is the historical things available to us. But since then, and ever since, we have been, even a Brahmin has become a Sikh, right? We did not not allow the all Dalit communities, the Kshatriya communities, Varnas, Avarnas, Savarnas, and women which were considered in that Manu Simritis or Varnashram Dharam or popularly caste system, in that the women who were considered below the Avarnas, they have been part of these ceremonies. I mean, they will remain. They will be part of the Panj Piaras. Panj Piaras is an idea. Panj Piara is an institution where the basic qualification starts with one, Ikovankar. Anyone who wants to do this will be allowed to do this. Anyone who wants to stop it, you can do whatever you want to do in your home. That's your house rule. Don't try to make that a rule for the whole country or the governance. Similarly, what you do in your Sikh Jathebandi, tanu mubarak hove. But that doesn't mean that's how 30 million Sikhs will operate and that's how the Panth will operate. Panth has always embraced this. Panth embraced it at the time. Panth embraced it in the prisons of the Mir Manus. Panth embraced it 100 years ago when our women leaders, when they're joining the Jathas like Bibi Balbir Kaur to free the Gurdwaras, we have always embraced it. And we will continue to embrace it. I have been part of it. I look for solidarities and allyship with those who want to make part of it. Those who choose to not make part of it, in their Jathebandis, we are asking them to think about it, because this is an idea. This is an institution which practices any level of bias, is countering the idea of Ikovankar.
I like that. I like that, that when we talk about the Panj Piare, we talk about, this collective equality and the coming together of all peoples. We don't focus on the fact that people were excluded. It's that no one was excluded. And for some reason, when it comes to gender, then some of us at least start to think about it in a different perspective. But the point is that no one was excluded. And it does run counter to this concept that Guru Gobind Singh Ji was very clearly, displaying, but also living, was, this idea of a one, which then cannot allow for these types of discriminations or restrictions. So I'm going to move a little bit away from 1699, and we started to talk about the Indian subcontinent and what was happening, and the fact that we have this regional representation from the Panj Piare and the significance as well. But so maybe let's unpack that a little bit. Was this purely, we know the impact in the Sikh Panth, or the region where the Sikhs were, the area of the subcontinent, but was there a significance beyond? But before you answer that, maybe set the stage for us a little bit. What was happening in and around the world? What was the environment, and was there a broader significance beyond just that geographic region?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very important to create that macro view. So within Punjab and subcontinent of India, we know this is the reign of Aurangzeb. I mean, Aurangzeb, even today, brings out very extreme positions by what the Hindutva people take and what Audrey takes when she's writing a book on him and defending herself on Twitter. So the point is, this is the reign of Aurangzeb. In the reign of Aurangzeb, we are also playing a role, we meaning the Sikh and the Sikh leadership, and we clearly had a serious dent we were making in how Aurangzeb was doing things. It started from 1675 when Guru Tegh Bahadur Pasha's martyrdom with a public beheading happened. Public beheading. We think it is bad these days. Imagine those days when nobody would speak about it. You didn't have Doctors Without Borders, and you didn't have reporters who were able to make documentaries of this. We barely got 2 Sikhs to take care of the Guru's last rites properly, right? So that's the scene. Veer Singh describes when Guru Gobind Singh comes on the scene, because it's related directly to Guru Gobind Singh, the institution of Vaisakhi and Khalsa. He says, Hindustan, he uses this word, there was a fear in Hindustan. There was absolute power being practiced. And then he goes into describe, this is how Hindus feel about it. This is how other Muslims feel about it. Well, this is our way of presenting too. What is happening at the India at the time is there's a consolidation of power. We are seeing similar things happening in India even now. So there are lessons to be learned. Who are the collaborators in that power? Which Raja was doing what? We had Rajas essentially, all the kings come together and pay certain tribute or money or army to the emperor. Emperor is Aurangzeb. So there is a debate about What kind of Islam will be practiced? There's a debate about which Hindus are participating with the state or monarchy at the time of Aurangzeb. There's a debate about what are the rest of the Kshatriyas, those who say it's our job to fight, or the Hindus, what is happening with the Brahmins at the time of Kashmiri. You know that story? But now let's superimpose that on everything in South Asia. South Asia is going through this debate. What has happened to the natives of this country? That's one question. Because you have a dynasty which came from Central Asia or parts of the Middle East and is ruling. So what happened to the natives? And gurus have been working on what to do with the natives. Second debate is who are the collaborators and who are the ones who are going to address these questions. Third thing which is going on, and I'm going to just bring this together in the words we are used to, what are the religious and the political leaders doing about this? Are they only complaining? Are they only meditating? Are part of them spiritual collaborators with the state? Are part of the politicians just only looking out so their kingship can be maintained? All of that is going on. In that context, when you have the inauguration of the Khalsa happening, this period between 1675 to 1699, Guru Gobind Pasha is dealing with what emperor is doing and is also dealing with the 22 kings. Who is siding with the Guru? Who changes allegiances? Who eventually remains only one Raja with the Guru, Raja of Nahan? So diplomacy, battles, politics, which we have another webinar on the Sikh Heritage Month, we will discuss all these. But the point is, this is the reality of the subcontinent. Guru is creating a renaissance about what this new community, the new nation will be doing, and is also preparing people who will be leading it. And the spiritual and the politics and the political domain, they come together to sort of present a solution to the Indian subcontinent. And here are the people who are internally and externally are filled with love, Piare. They're filled with love. And the Shabad operates in their mind. Their consciousness only has the wisdom in them. And they're willing to do anything and everything, including physically die fighting if need be, because they are drenched. The suras, these warriors, are drenched with love because they have this deep crimson red within them. This is the vocabulary of Guru Granth Sahib. This is what Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj is saying. And that's what was presented, an archetype, a solution on how to create a sort of a better cohesion between the natives of the land and the solutions to protect the native freedoms as well as freedoms of those, and having a dialogue with those who are sort of controlling the freedoms.
So that's again just 1675 to 1699, the preparation, what was happening, the impact. So let's go on to the impact. So what happened afterwards, and how long did it continue to happen? So this revelation or inauguration was a monumental milestone in the history of the subcontinent, or and so if we look 10, 15, 20 years afterwards, maybe 50 years afterwards, what changed, if anything?
Oh, it completely redefined what Punjab is and what subcontinent of India is. The collective leadership of the Panj Piare finally, in the absence of the physical body of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, the true test comes then, you see, when the leaders who have trained, and then the next people that trained, actually the word Kaur, which comes from cover, I interpret it like this: the one who's next in command to lead. When the next in command to lead, how do they lead when the physical guru is not present anymore? That's the true test. So you have a history from 1708 for lakhs, 100 years, where everything which was taught was being brought in practice, including setting up Banda Bahadur's Raj, including going through the genocides, including capturing Lahore in 1765, including figuring out how to do justice to sort of the native populations, even if you are the ruler, including figuring out if we have these 12 missiles, if one of them does not side with us, how to deal with them, including figuring out if 11 of them don't get together, still how to come together for the larger Panthak projects. It was a very successful project. When you look in the line of world religions, if I may call it that, what happens when the prophet leaves? In this case, Guru Gobind Singh leaves. For how long are they able to practice this? Generally it happens within 20 to 30, up to 50 years, things die down very quickly. You have 100 years of history, which completely changed the history of Punjab and the subcontinent of India, because the project was in Punjab. But the project existed beyond Punjab. And this is where the impacts were seen. When you have Panj Piares and 2 Takhts outside of Punjab, impacts were seen in Bihar and Maharashtra, because Bihar was the first diaspora center which the Guru Tegh Bahadur himself established. And that diaspora was not limited to that, but that was the first center. Diaspora had already been from Sri Lanka all the way to what we now call the areas of Afghanistan. So the impact was seen from Afghanistan all the way to the end of wherever the Aurangzeb's reign was. That reign was demolished. We prepared, we fought with the invaders, we did not discriminate between whether somebody was a Muslim or a Hindu. When even Banda Singh Bahadur said, you will be the local leader or the chief, because that was a system. They didn't look at their religion. They did not touch their worship sites. So politically and religiously, if we can come together, the ideas of oneness were practiced. Natives won the lands as well. They became free. They did not look into the backgrounds of people. They looked into who was practicing the right doctrine. As we went beyond or away from the ideas of the Shabad, we started to crack. And we see this and how the consolidations happened during Ranjit Singh and later. But was it successful? Absolutely, it was successful. Did they practice the ideas or the paradigm of Ekko Onkar and Naam? Absolutely, they did, but not in the absolute sense, because they're human beings. But this was the success. It changed the geography, the terrain, and how we operate, how we think, how we live, and also how we govern. And by the way, I'll just give a snippet here. And Dr. Iqbal actually recorded this. He has written Khalsa Shamshiro Kurara Baburd, that the way Khalsa practiced in Punjab, because that's where the Khalsa was ruling at the time, the way they think. Quran is your ability, your constitution, your thought. And Shamshir is Kirpan, which is ability to rule. He says in both cases, Khalsa was able to overpower the existing system, the existing governance system, and was able to replace it with the Khalsa systems. And people celebrated it and people welcomed it.
So you've said a couple of things, and I'm writing them down because I want to pick up on them. The natives became free. And this is a perfect segue into the last part of our title, which is freedom, solidarity. And this is the part I thought, 2 seemingly disconnected words being put together here. So I understand at some level what freedom means, and we all kind of talk about at an individual level what the Khalsa Inauguration ceremony meant individually in terms of personal freedom, in terms of consciousness, in terms of individual unshackling of your mind and your thoughts. But are we talking about a broader freedom here? And why freedom solidarity? What does solidarity have to do with it?
Sure. So, I mean, this is making it relevant to all people, even the ones who are not part of the Sikh fold. That's why this part is very important. Sikhs and Khalsas, they have their own journeys, and we have a large tent, and individual freedoms sort of define your journey into how you're going to go towards Anandpur. But freedom is much larger. In classically religious terminologies, they use the term mukti or salvation or liberation. I like to simplify. Freedom is of all kinds, from mental slavery, spiritual slaveries, and then physical slaveries are part of it. This is what gurus have been tackling from day one. That's why they were imprisoned. Nobody's going to imprison you if you're only tackling the spiritual slavery. It's a collective word for us. In this collective, freedoms of all kind are being brought in. And not only when you are yourself free, when the community or the Khalsa felt free, then they were assuring this for all communities. And we see this. I'm going to actually jump 100 years ago. In the Guru period, it is very clear. In Ranjit Singh period, it's very clear. And under British period, when 100 years ago this is being described, we did the same thing. Even the solidarity came, we said we will work with the left as well. Let's bring that up, because this is a bigger issue. This is, in farmers' protest as well. We worked with the left. We had Gadarites who were very much just like in the Guru period and the Khalsa period, there were different ideologies. At that time, we didn't have Richard Dawkins or we didn't have Karl Marx, you know. But if it, but their reminiscences were there in earlier 20th century. So guess what? Anyone who's fighting for people's right, we have a natural tendency to work with them. And there could be anyone. The person could be a Brahman. The person could be following particular persuasion of Islam. Person could be saying that I don't believe in God, but I believe in these freedoms. We have an allyship. We have a natural tendency to work with people who fight for freedom, and we did. 100 years ago, when Dr. Ambedkar looked at it, why did he say that he likes the idea of Sikhi? Because Khalsa school was being set up for him, because he said they might not fully understand some of the ideas, but they have come closest to calling each other pais. He uses this word. He says they don't discriminate once they have entered the fold. At the time, again, we discriminate, but the point is, this is the best he had seen. So he saw that light, he saw that practice. Similarly, the Gadarites did it. They're like, okay, I might be initiated into the Khalsa, but I like what the Unionist Party of Punjab is thinking, or what the Gadarite revolutionaries are thinking, whether they're in Berkeley or sitting in parts of Punjab or rest of the India, or whether they were sitting in Singapore at the time, or whether INA is being brought out through General Mohan Singh and then later Subhash Chandra Bose. My point in saying this is this. We have worked with allyship and solidarity. Solidarity here means you're coming together for a particular project, for a particular right. That's what solidarity means. So we do develop freedom solidarities. We will develop that with Dalits. We will develop that with LGBTQs. We will develop this with Brahmins. We will develop this with Muslims. We will develop this with Jews. We will develop this with Christians. We will develop with this agnostics, atheists, whatever they khande bane hoye ne jede. We will continue to do that as long as it is for particular freedom. We have always done it. Gurus had allies which came from all sorts of backgrounds, religious or tribal beliefs included. And we will continue to do it in 2021. And 100 years ago, when we were removed 200 years from the 1699 event, we were able to successfully demonstrate. And let's be very clear, not every Sikh did it. We have varieties of opinions, but those who believe in it, nobody said you were wrong. Some of them joined, for example, INA, which had a relationship with Germany and Japan at the time. Some of them joined British, but there were others who joined neither. They either became Babbars, or they became Gadarites, or they joined other independence movement in alliance with Bhagat Singhs and others, or Sarabas. So that's what we need to understand. Khalsa has a natural tendency to work in solidarity with all peoples and communities who are fighting to ensure and assure and deliver particular freedoms.
So that's very interesting. And before I pose my next question, I'm going to remind our audience that we're at about 15 minutes before our time is up. So please do post your questions. I do see a couple coming up in the chat. So feel free to post your questions now, and I'm going to start taking them. So this idea of this natural tendency of coming together, and you mentioned various other movements or ideologies, including Gadarites and whatnot, and we have this kind of, again, I'm coming back to the farmers' protest, because we have this same kind of mixing and coming together under a cause. But I'm going to take it a little bit broader. At the same time, though, we know that in the Sikh month and in the Sikh psyche, whatever the cause is and the coming together, the underpinning is Sikh doctrine. And the inspiration is Sikh doctrine, and the guidance is taken from Sikh doctrine, and it comes out very clearly, like it is coming out very clearly in the farmers' protest. Yet we have this debate because there is so much trepidation about mixing of church and state, and we go around in circles, particularly right now in the context of India, talking about Indian nationalism versus whatever your kind of spiritual inspiration may be, and what comes first, or whether something needs to come before the other. So is that still, let's talk about that. And I know we understand this concept of how one cannot exist without the other, and how one empowers the other. But in the modern context, there's so much trepidation. So how do we explain that, or do we need to justify it? I guess I should ask.
Well, look, I think we are bringing, we will call it the Western models of democracies, other things, when we are discussing the separation of church and state. But in that context, let me just mention this, and please go Google and read this. Chief Justice William Rehnquist in the US Supreme Court, when he retired, he wrote his first article, and his first article was, "There is no separation of church and state in America." So we have to understand there is always a particular heritage which plays a role. In case of even America, which is considered a liberal democracy in the world, in its absence of whatever happened in the last 10 years, William Rehnquist was before that. Do look into that. It actually does follow Judeo-Christian heritage ideas and now is grappling with other cultural and other races, other ideas as well. That said, look, there has never been, we can get rid of these labels for a second, church and state, but there has never been separation of religion and politics. We know this. We have known this throughout history, whether it is today, whether it was in 1699. We have been talking about it, whether it is today's India, today's Punjab. Look at what all political parties of Punjab, those who want Sikh vote, they all go to Gurdwaras, they all use Sikh ceremonies. Look at how Guru Tegh Bahadur Pasha is being presented this year. Mr. Modi is talking about it. Captain Amrinder Singh is talking about it. All the Badals are talking about it. All the people who are fighting DSGMC elections are talking about it. That always happens. There is no separation of religion and politics. They are the powers which always have existed. Guru Nanak Sahib has mentioned them, that it's always the Mir and the Peer. They come together, the political and the spiritual heads, to figure out how to control people. So that said, we don't need to worry about this superficial division. We need to acknowledge it and figure out how to leverage who are the right political and spiritual, who are integrating the two, not for personal benefit, not for state religion, not for one community or the other, but for this idea of oneness or Eko which is distributive, which is the freedoms for all, with absolutely zero exception. So that's how I look at this. In the farmers' protests, the simple application would be, we're not gonna ask everyone who's an ally in a farmers' protest what they think about particular Sikh issue. If that's how we're going to do it, that's not solidarity for freedom, for farmers' rights. So we must. Sikhs have various subgroups who have joined it. Various Punjabi subgroups have joined it. Various Indian subgroups have joined it, and they come from all affiliations, all religious or non-religious backgrounds. To reduce it to a particular Sikh issue, or to reduce it to a particular religious element, is a disservice. Similarly, the opposite is true. Anyone who is joined in to tell them, don't talk about your issue as part of the solidarity, is also a disservice. But we need to nuance that. When we join the movement. Movement had people who are moving it. Those who are moving it, their leaders need to exercise restraint. They need to know what is the right place to talk about which issue. But when you are joining for farmers' rights, even if somebody has done clearly those things, and many have, who doesn't have a gray in their record, and then there's a time and place for it. When you talk about farmers' right, you need all the solidarity to fight against this hegemonic culture which India is churning into, and this has become, it's like a 1970s kind of a system is going on in India. So in the context of Khalsa and Vaisakhi, just like on the event day, people will not understand everything, but those who want to be representatives of the people, they better have a clear mind of Shabad. They better have an understanding that I'm willing to do anything to make sure this freedom solidarity survives in the case of farmers context.
So I'm going to bring it back to something that you said earlier in the presentation or in our discussion, which was that the Khalsa principles were absolutely practiced, but they weren't practiced in the absolute sense because they are humans. And one of the big issues or debates we have is to actually put our leaders on a pedestal and test them on a perfection status, right? On a perfection level, and ultimately everyone fails and they fall from the pedestal as well. And we see a lot of that happening with the leaders and the farmers' protest and what's happening there as well. So and this concept of a perfect Sikh, or who is a perfect Sikh, or who is not a perfect Sikh, or who is entitled to be a leader versus those who are not entitled to be leaders. And we have a vast array of different types of people that have emerged as leaders, young and old, established and non-established, underdogs, and others as well. So let's talk about that as well. And we all have our own views. So without getting into the detail, but this idea that people do not need to absolutely practice in perfection, yet are still capable of, fulfilling a cause or providing a great service.
Yeah, so I would say get into the preparation mode. Look, whether it is Plato or whether it is other things you like to, the leadership is a reflection of the masses and masses reflect the leadership. We know that's there. In the words of Guru Nanak Sahib, when andhi raiyat gyan vihoni, when the constituency is blind, anyone will rise to the top, right? So let's not just blame the leader. What are we, those who want to tread this path? This is really about the lovers. Remember, this is why I like to call Panj Piare as 5 lovers. Those who want to be the lovers, what needs to operate in their mind? How they need to practice that wisdom which Guru has given? Because we are answerable to the Guru. And a secondary and a third and the fourth and the fifth level, we might be answerable to our organizations, our employers, or whatever else might be in Jathebandis and other places. But if you're treading this path of love, then the Shabad is a requirement. So prepare that. Do we understand in the case of farmers or in whatever, let's go back to farmer for a second. We need to really understand what are the options. We really need to understand who are the players. We really need to understand which issue to bring up when, which issue to talk in private, which issue to talk in public. There are strategies of all kind. There is a state involved here. There are multitude of states involved in here. There are multitudes even of farmer unions involved here. There are multitudes of Sikh political understandings involved here. It's quite complex. We must recognize that complexity. We must prepare as lovers to deal with those complexities and see who can take us to what level in order to deliver for the farm laws. Now that's in the farming thing. Let's apply this to the Panth level. I mean, it's the same thing goes here. I've been part of an effort and so have other been, but Sarbat Khalsa hasn't happened again. Are we preparing again? I mean, we are still manipulating those processes. Everyone, we had 2-3 levels of Jathedars. They continue. Now they're mishmashed. Same people who denounce them are now using them for Vaisakhi purposes. Think about that for a second. Do we really understand what we want to get out of Khalsa governance? What does it look like, in current times? Who really are the representatives? And it will eventually lead to that. Where are those lovers who are preparing? And of those lovers who are only answerable to the Guru. That's the kind of criteria we need to start preparing towards. And those who prepared on that, at the time of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, we know those 5 because they went that way. Then we know few more who went that way in 18th century. We know few more who went that way in last 30 years. It's never too many. So we need to either become one of those few as a choice, as an utter act of volunteerism, or support those who are on that path. That's what I have to offer.
Now, we talked about the Indian subcontinent and the impact and the diaspora at that time. And we are the diaspora today. And I do want to bring it into this idea of, the Panth and the fact that we haven't had a Sarbat Khalsa. And what, in the context of today's day and age, where we are in some ways not too different from the diaspora of the time. We are geographically further away and more dispersed, but probably more connected. And if anything, the way in which the diaspora has come together around the farmers' protest is maybe an example of how we can actually use our collective might and our collective voice to work together towards a common cause. So, bringing it back to Vaisakhi 99, but here we are, the diaspora all over the globe. What should we be thinking about? What should we be focusing on in terms of takeaways on this Vaisakhi 2021 as we're sitting electronically connected through this seminar, all suffering the same pandemic, right? Interestingly, together at the same time. Here's another thing that's brought us together over these last 12 months as well. Is the message any different, or what is it that we should be holding on to and really focusing on in our own families and in our communities?
I mean, look, that's a loaded question. I'll just, people have to make their own decisions on this. You can take it Vaisakhi as a celebration. Nothing wrong with it, but that's what you have chosen then. You can take Vaisakhi as This is my preparation. So let me really allow Shabad to enter my consciousness. You can take Vaisakhi as being, if you've been doing that, not reduce it to only spiritual elements. And let me see if I'm ready to do this on behalf of the Panth and start doing certain things like that. If you have done that, then the next level could be, well, we all see manipulations in the Indian government or the US governments or the Canadian governments or the provinces. We also see manipulations in SGPC, DSGMC, and Chief Khalsa Diwans. But what about in our own Jathebandis? What about in our own caucuses and our parliaments and AGPC and PSGPCs and other GPCs and our local Gurdwara committees? It's the same problem. We're just not dealing with it because I believe that we are not working to prepare ourselves in a genuine way, exercise this idea of Shabad governance, which is what was given to Khalsa that day. The things of the past we are done with. We acknowledge them, we know their limitation, but we are done with it. That's what revolutionary stuff is. That's what was radical. And the next ones will not entertain those. They are very aware of it. They know that they are very powerful entities. They're very powerful superstructures, as we call them. Our work should be, if I am personally fighting for certain freedoms, how do I utilize Shabad to fight for that? If I'm publicly fighting for certain freedoms, how do I fight with those superstructures from the idea of the wisdoms given to us as a Granth Panth? Vaisakhi eventually is about Granth Panth. Lovers coming together to become the representatives on behalf of the Sikhs, to ask the right questions, to ask very tough questions, to do some serious churning within, individually, and within our organizations and Jathebandis, and finding the most qualified, not perfect. We don't have perfections. We should not look for that. We look for the most qualified with the right advisors to get the things done. That's how things got done. Banda Singh Bahadur had advisors. Everyone has advisors. Today, our advisors are not clear about Gurbani as well, is one way to look at it. They're not clear about which project delivery you are getting into, might not be as clear about it. So Vaisakhi goes back to Khalsa. Khalsa is the one who has a direct relationship with the Guru. So let's develop that direct relationship, not via some agencies or some other things. And this is where the Sikh world is struggling with. Those of us who will have those direct relationships or aspiring for it, they better figure out to not make Vaisakhi only as a spiritual and celebratory ceremony. For them, this is about assuring the right governance to secure the right freedoms.
And focused on Shabad, and which kind of reverberates throughout the discussion we've been having today. So I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to start wrapping up. There's a few questions that I think I'm going to bring a few of them in together, and then I'm going to ask you one last question before to Lean. So somebody, I'm following the debate on the Q&A where people are asking about the word that you used for inauguration, the Khalsa, which was pritio. And then the follow-up question was whether there was a more relatable or easy to understand, concept. And I'm going to come to that in just a minute. Just really quickly, if people do want to read up or look at some references in terms of accounts of what happened in 1699, and do some research on their own, do you have any recommendations of to read?
Sure. I mean, look, any word we use other than pragatyo will be problematic. This is the politics of translation. Every word we use is for a particular audience. And we are just trying to say, do realize that Guru Gobind Singh did not create it. Guru Gobind Singh brought it out. So that's the idea. Use your own words to explain that. The Sikh psyche and the Sikh tradition maintains Guru Gobind Singh Pragataya Sikha Khalsa. So that's the idea. In terms of readings, look, no one book will do justice. There are books which I have been reading, and the secondary texts of Senapath, Sri Gursoba, Pai Nandlal, and then the books which we have mentioned, like we have mentioned Nikki Gulinder Kaur's book, if you want to understand Khalsa from a rememory feminist angle. There's a newest book in town. Louis Fenech just wrote a book on the Charist Five. Read everything, but then apply the lens of what we call Sikh paradigms. Because every author brings insights. Every author might bring certain interpretations we have not considered. Every author may have done research or sort of brought in more data, as call it, for us to consider. I would read all of those things. If you have time, you don't even need to ask me. You have Mr. and Mrs. Google to figure these things out for you these days. But if you're looking for the authoritative account, it must be born out of Gurbani. This is why our focus is look at what Vaisakhi is in Guru Granth Sahib. Then look at the historical event, because as soon as you bring history, there's going to be much more debate, because so far it had been his story. The only female author I mentioned to you is Nikki Guninder Kaur. She's trying to bring in her story. This is why men have not been allowing women, and they must allow it because Guru had allowed it. So the works need to be read, they need to be considered, but in the light of Shabad, in the light of ideas of Vaisakhi, ideas of warrior, ideas of freedom, as they are presented in Guru Granth Sahib.
So I think I'm going to wrap it up, and now I'm going to ask you one last question. And before I do go there, there is a question in the chat box where somebody is asking about, are there any resources that they could turn to? And I'm going to ask the administrators maybe to put up a link here to be able to delve further into understanding Guru Granth Sahib. So if somebody could put up a link to accessing the Guru Granth Sahib project, I do encourage all of you who are online to please check it out if you have not already. It is we believe, and all of those who are involved in this seva and has been involved in this seva for many, many years now, believe it is really a transformational initiative in respect of making Guru Granth Sahib accessible to all peoples everywhere at all times. So please do check it out. But my last question to you, Harinder, is so what's your elevator pitch? And we struggle with this a lot, particularly in this diaspora, having to explain to people what April 13th or 14th or Vaisakhi means and what really is in a nutshell. But what's your elevator pitch? If you had 60 seconds to explain it to me, and I had never heard of it before, said, what are you celebrating today, my fellow Sikh colleague? What would you say?
Well, I would say Vaisakhi in a cultural context is a harvesting festival in Punjab. We celebrate and thank whatever entities you answer. We call it one force and Eko the thank you for this abundance. We get to survive another 6 months. That's what it meant economically. And in that celebration, the Sikh paradigm elevated that to let's think about larger questions of life once we are meeting the physical sustenance. So Guru Nanak onwards, the questions of how do you make Vaisakhi even more beautiful came about. And then it had to do with let's mentally and spiritually develop ourselves. Let's bring some wisdom into our lives. And those wisdoms were practiced and imparted for almost 200 years. And then by the time 1699 Vaisakhi comes, Sikhs mark that as being that we were trained as a community. We were trained as a community to not go and look for people to interpret the wisdom for us anymore, to not look for people who we will ask as to what our rights are. We will fight for our own rights and people's rights based on this training we received from them in the form of wisdom from our gurus. That's what Vaisakhi is for us. Vaisakhi is about thankfulness. Vaisakhi is about carrying forward that revolution, which is to guarantee all freedoms for all peoples. And we cherish that, we live that, even when we are living in different countries, we need to be fighting for these rights by employing the ideas which have been given to us in the form of wisdom, which for us is in Guru Granth Sahib.
Thank you very much, Harinder Singh. And thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Jasleen now for some closing remarks. And again, wishing you all the best as we celebrate this revolutionary day. And Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Jasleen?
Guru Fateh Ji.
Thank you. So I'm more than excited to announce our upcoming webinar on the topic of Khalsa scholars and martyrs by Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh, presented by our very own Satbir Singh. Also, please tune in to our Sikh cast to listen to our Sikhi family talk about Vaisakhi throughout 13 days of the countdown to Vaisakhi. Other than that, big thank you goes out to our speakers today, Harinder Singh and Ramandeep Kaur. You've given us so much to think about, and the presentation was truly amazing. This will conclude our webinar for today, so please have a wonderful day. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Guru Fateh.